Welcome to episode number 200 of CXOTalk. I'm Michael Krigsman. CXOTalk brings the most innovative, interesting business executives in the world for in-depth conversation where we talk about innovation, we talk about disruption, and we talk about leadership. And on episode number 200, I'm so thrilled because today we're talking with Sahal Laher, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer of one of the most iconic and long-standing brands in American retailing and American fashion, which is Brooks Brothers. Sahal Laher, how are you? And thanks for taking the time and joining us.
Good afternoon, Mike. Good. Thank you. Doing very well.
Sahal, Brooks Brothers was founded in 1818. And I know we all know the name of the brand, but please give us a little background and history of Brooks Brothers, and then during our conversation, we'll take it up to the present.
Absolutely. So really excited to be on the show and share a little bit about our journey. So we are a 198-year-old brand and have outfitted 39 of the US presidents. And as we continue to evolve, we are really moving more towards a lifestyle brand, which appeals to not just people looking for the traditional formal attire, but also, a recent partnership with Zach Posen, who was signed as designer for our women's collection, and really a lot of things that we've done with our Red Fleece brand, which appeals to some of our younger demographic. So I think our company and our owners have done a very good job of keeping the brand evolving and trying to remain relevant and remain a true lifestyle brand as we are in this era of just mass change, competition, and the change is on many levels. It's not just the consumers themselves and their expectations changing, but the entire market and the way people shop has changed. And therefore, a lot of the way that we go to market is changing, and obviously digital and technology are very big enablers in that journey.
That's amazing to think that you have been around for almost 200 years and you've outfitted 39 presidents. And I think it's pretty obvious that a company that's been in business for so many years has had to have gone through many different types of changes and reinventions and evolutions. And so you were talking about change in the market, change in customers. What are maybe can you elaborate on the market forces, the competitive landscape, the nature of changing customer expectations? And so what is driving the evolution of Brooks Brothers today?
Absolutely. So our business has always been kind of founded on personal relationships and really the white glove service that works with our customers to really uniquely understand you as an individual and your preferences, and based on that really curate a look for you that is 100% you. It's not a one size fits all, or it's not one of five different looks we have on the shelf, but it's really very unique, and it really is something that we take great pride in working with everyone and their unique preferences. I think the changes that we're seeing obviously are people shop now in different ways than they used to. They obviously are a lot more, the customer in general, not just in fashion, but really in every industry with the web, is a lot more informed. And generally what you find is that the people come in now with a much better understanding of what it is that they want. They have a much better understanding of the competitive landscape, of where you are in the industry and some of the things that differentiate you. They are also a lot more, aware of, the brands and brand loyalty, and that to some extent brand loyalty though is not really what it used to be. So our chairman and CEO Claudio Del Vecchio always says, we're not old. Um, we're not just good because we're old. We're old because we're good. And I think that's a very articulate way of putting it, because we really do continue to look at what is it that our customers want, what is it that the market wants. Obviously, online shopping and mobile shopping and digital in general has really disrupted the market, and now you have a number of pure play online retailers that are in this space as well. But I think for the space that we're in, there's always going to be a home for the brick and mortar stores because of the level of service that we provide, and the white glove nature of how we work with our consumers. The reality is that even if you were to buy things online, other than probably ties and shirts and maybe pants, a lot of the other things are going to require some kind of tailoring or alterations anyway, if you're looking for something that is again unique and really is a look that is not something that everyone has different things that they look for, but also for example, one of my arms is half an inch shorter than the other, and so yeah, you can take an off the rack item and not alter it, but it's really, if you want to go that extra 10% and really have a great look instead of a good look, then there's an element of tailoring that needs to take place. So those elements, I think, continue to be extremely important and will continue to be important. And the store again for us is a very important part of our brand. We have over 600 stores globally, and there are no plans to to drastically change that number, either up nor down. We feel like we have a good mix of direct to consumer online versus the traditional retail stores, and also the Brooks Brothers factory stores. So overall, I think it's the key message for all retailers, but really also specifically to fashion, is that I think it's unrealistic to punt on one of your channels just because the market is shifting.
So it sounds like the like customer service and that the white glove service, as you described it, has been the centerpiece, a centerpiece of Brooks Brothers' approach for 200 years. And now what you're doing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what you're doing is translating that into a multi-channel or multiple or omni-channel approach.
That's exactly right. And I think that manifests itself in many different ways. So first and foremost, it requires that we have a consistent customer experience across channels. And that doesn't apply just to personalization, but it really applies in general, where every company now needs to break down the silos between channels, because I think traditionally retailers have thought in channels, and they've been organized in channels and had separate business units for online versus brick and mortar versus factory. And what is very evident is that the customer doesn't see it that way. The customer doesn't think in channels. They think of it as Brooks Brothers. And so it's critical that we have the same products available on all of our channels. We have the same level of personalization available on all channels. And most importantly, I think people are really looking at retailers and companies that are easy to do business with. It has to be simple. It has to be intuitive. You can't have a very complex navigation on your website. You can't have extremely long and tedious checkout process, because we've all been to those websites and and lost lost motivation to complete the checkout. And I think Amazon really has set the tone, not just in terms of usability, but also in terms of fulfillment. And so that is the new norm in terms of customer expectations. It's, there was a period in time where you could ask for a $10 or $20 shipping charge, and people didn't mind that. There was a time where you could say you'll get your product in 7 to 10 days, and people didn't mind that. But I think that's really changed, and that's gone away now. And everyone expects the ease of use, and in some cases, you do want the instant gratification. And I'm, as an Amazon Prime member, quite frequently just opting for the next day shipping option. And obviously Amazon is working on same day shipping, but the reality is that next day shipping is probably going to become the norm. And for all of these online brands, whether you're a 198-year-old brand, or you're an 8-month-old brand, if you aren't, if it's not simple and you're not easy to do business with, and you don't have a supply chain that can fulfill in a fashion that is going to give people the product they want when they want it, then you're really going to be at a big disadvantage, and people are really going to go to another site where it's easier to do business.
We have an interesting question from, excuse me, from Alan Berkson on Twitter, who's wondering, in a business where there is so much service and customization, how do you maintain that customer experience, especially going across multiple channels? And then he's asking about the role of culture in this as well.
So those are both great questions. So let's talk first about just how we do that, and how that level of personalization and kind of white glove service is replicated across channels in a seamless way. So just to give a little bit of background, right? I think there was a period of time where everyone used to go to their store on Main Street in their town, and they had relationships with the Brooks Brothers associate, and they had probably been going there for many years, and everything, all your preferences were written down in a black book, and that sales associate that you worked with really knew what it is that you want for a look. They knew everything that you had purchased in the past, and all of that was kind of maintained in that black book. And that's a great model, obviously, because you get a very high level of service, and you have someone that has a personal relationship with you. But the reality of the world we live in now is that it's just not like it used to be, in that now we travel more. It's we may want to go to the store, not in our hometown, but where we work, or we might be on business at a conference, and we might want to go to a store. And so, what we've really been working very hard on for the last couple of years is trying to figure out, so if John Smith comes into a store and he's never been into that store before, but he's been a customer for 10 years, we are missing the mark if we don't give him personalized service based on the information we already know about him. And so the store associate at that store in Las Vegas, where you are for a conference, in a very short period of time needs to be equipped with tools that can really tell them who is John Smith, and what are his preferences, what are his likes, and what is in his virtual wardrobe in terms of his purchase history. And really based on that, we can then, equip that associate who has just met you 2 minutes ago to still provide a very high level of service, because they will have, we will have turned data that we have into actual actionable insights that you, the store associate, can use to really have a more personalized conversation, as opposed to, talking to everyone who walks into the store that you don't know about the same 5 products in the fall collection. So that's a very important piece of who we are. And obviously replicating that is requires a lot of translation of this data into insights. And everyone talks about big data, everyone talks about these buzzwords of big data and machine learning and so on, but this is really a case study where it is the differentiator. And really in all industries, I think can be a differentiator, not just for personalization, but for many different parts of your supply chain and the way that you go to market. If you use the data that you have and implement machine learning type of platforms, which in its simplest form, for those who are not familiar with machine learning, it's you know computers have the ability now with these platforms to learn from data and to spot trends in data without being explicitly programmed. And that's a very powerful trend in the market right now. And really, without that, in the past, you would have to find a specific use case that you were after and comb through all of your data, aggregate it, and come up with these findings. And the way that the machine learning works is we can do that on the fly, and we can do that for terabytes and terabytes of data, which in the old days obviously is just not possible, right? Even if we took everyone's black book, every single store associate's black book from the old days where they had the customer service and all of that done in paper books, you know that's already a lot of data. And now you multiply it by everything like your online click stream, right? So every time you go online and you're navigating the website, there's a trail of breadcrumbs that every customer leaves behind in terms of what have they browsed, what have they put in their cart and not bought, what have they, how much time have they spent looking at a particular item. And so all of this information, when you aggregate it together and you have a true big data strategy that utilizes some of these next generation tools like machine learning and in-memory databases, then we have the ability to really replicate that service. And now you can also make that available online, and we can make more thoughtful recommendations for you online, as opposed to the showing everyone the same 5 products that have just come out as things that they might be interested in. And the research shows, right, that Amazon has done a very good job with this. Netflix has done a very good job with this. And there is an extremely high number of I think the number in the McKinsey study was over 60 or 65%, where things that you buy on Amazon or shows that you watch on Netflix are based directly on the recommendation that was given to you by the site. So that's a fascinating number and has huge potential. When you move past personalization and get into just in terms of the challenging market that retail is now, that's an extremely critical piece, because if you have, again, a personalized way to offer these cross-sell and upsell products, that is obviously going to be a win-win, because it's going to be things that the customer really sees as being perfect things to augment their existing wardrobe. And obviously from the retailer's standpoint, it's going to result in additional revenue.
That's pretty incredible. So you have adopted machine learning in order to improve the recommendations that you provide online, and I'm assuming that your sales associates can provide based on purchase history, frequency of interaction, I'm assuming, in the stores. Can you tell us just briefly about the tools? Did you develop the tools in-house? Did you buy them? Talk about the technology
So this
briefly.
is still an initiative that is ongoing, because as you know, this is a very big undertaking, right? It's not something that you can spend a short period of time or your traditional project cycle of 9 to 12 months and say we're done, right? This is really truly a dynamic thing that has to become part of your DNA as a retailer and as a company. So, if we take a step back, and I'll provide a little bit of context, when Pandora started, right, they took a subset of their collection of songs, and they took, let's say, I don't know, it was like 9 or 10,000 songs, and they paid professional musicians to come in and listen to all of these songs, and then they had, developed this Excel spreadsheet with multiple attributes. So it had literally, dozens of attributes, over 100 total attributes for every single song, based on, I'm not a musician and not even qualified to speak to them, but it's obviously way deeper than just what is the genre of the song, or who is the artist, etc. But it really got into, what is the tempo, what are the instruments in the song. So anyway, so they had all of those attributes, and that was really, that project was called the Music Genome Project, where they took their products, and obviously you always have attributes for any product in any industry, right? So in the case of music, they knew who the artist was, they knew the length of the track, but they really didn't have a lot of meaningful attributes that a consumer could relate to, and that is really what was needed for personalization. So after they went through this initial process, and the musicians had kind of populated these, this entire database of attributes across 9 or 10,000 songs, then they ran it through this tool and said, okay, let's see how it works. Tell me a song you like, and let's see what the engine recommends to you. And they found that it was 9 or 10,000 songs sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot. It's a very small sample size, obviously, but they were very encouraged by the early results. And then that's where they said, okay, we have to do this for every single song. And that was really the birth of kind of Pandora, and the way that it, the premise of all of these platforms, right, is that the more you use it and the more it gets to know you, the more accurate are the recommendations. So similarly, what we're in the process of doing is we've had hundreds of attributes for all of our products in our PLM system, our product lifecycle management system, and that's a tool that we implemented about 3.5 years ago. It's from vendor PTC, which is a Boston-based company and very well known in the PLM space for apparel and fashion. And what we looked at is that yes, we've had these attributes, and then we've had these attributes. That system went live, and probably even prior to that. Mm-hmm. But how many of those attributes are truly customer-facing attributes, or ones that would be meaningful to make a recommendation? And the reality was that there weren't many, right? There was color, there was obviously the name of the product, and there was a handful of other things. But there wasn't, if we want to get to the next level of sophistication, either online or in store, but it has to be as sophisticated as being able to ask, I need a suit for a Cape Cod wedding, and getting a recommendation. Most search engines or most sites, if you entered that, you would get a few sites, you would get a few hits for Cape Cod, you would get a few hits for wedding, you would get a few hits for suit. And they wouldn't necessarily all be, interrelated to the point where you would have a recommendation or recommendations for a suit you could wear at a Cape Cod wedding. So that's just one, fairly rudimentary example. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of work to do, similar to what Pandora went through. There's work for us to do to really, populate those attributes for our, entire collection eventually. But, obviously you have to start with a subset of the collection. We have a large assortment, over 50,000 SKUs. So this is not going to be something we can do overnight. We start with the basics and populate those attributes, then you have a very good foundation to come up with these recommendations.
Now, can you talk about the relationship between service engagement, customer experience, this machine learning project, because it's all part of a broader perspective,
Absolutely.
so to speak, that you have.
Absolutely. So, I think, again, customers don't think in channels, right? And so, regardless of what channel they're interacting with you on, they expect that So if I went onto the website and made a purchase, and then I come into a store 2 weeks later, and you don't have any information on my order, or you don't have any information on the fact that that's even in my wardrobe, then you're missing the mark. So, ultimately, everyone, there's another big buzzword of 360 view of the customer, which really applies both ways. And what I mean by that is that it's equally important for the company to have that, but the customers expect you to have that as well. Because if I come into a store today and I placed an order last night, and you can't tell me my order status, or if I come into the store and see something else and you can't help me you know change that order based on something else that I found in the store. That then is a disjointed customer, engagement process and a customer service experience. So what we really, one of the first things that we did a couple years ago was, really work on creating this 360 degree view of the customer, which, sounds, fairly obvious, and it sounds fairly intuitive, but the reality is that very few people have that all in one place, because over time, it doesn't matter how long you've been in business. Obviously, the longer you've been in business, you're likely to have more silos of data. But even if you haven't been in business for decades, and you've only been in business a few years, nobody has just one sales system, right? You always, at a very minimum, have a point of sale system, and then you have a website. And then you need some kind of system for your customer service. You may need some kind of system for your store associate, be it clienteling, or looking at alterations, or made to measure, or whatever the case may be. So what we tried to do is, all of those systems that I named were one or more different databases when we started. And what we've worked to do is really bring all of this into a single database. And that single database now has John Smith's customer record. It has all of his preferences. It has his e-commerce transactions. It has his in-store purchases. It has his alterations and made-to-measure information. And it also has any interaction that he's had with our call center is all logged in one central place. So what that allows us to do is obviously elevate the level of service that we can provide, because regardless, again, of what channel is your preference to interact with us on any given day, we will be able to have a consistent view of who you are as a customer, and therefore we'll be able to better service whatever needs you have on that particular day. And they won't be these handoffs, or let me transfer you to the store that you placed the order at, let me transfer you to the call center or the e-commerce fulfillment team to look at where your order is in the fulfillment process. It really needs to be, again, simple, right? If it's not simple and intuitive, people are going to get frustrated and go elsewhere. So that is really, I think, in a nutshell, the driving forces behind why that 360 degree view of the customer is important. And again, it's really now something that is a big enabler for us, because our call center has tools that they never had before, and it allows them to really provide a level of service to the customer that is unmatched from where we started, when they had to alt tab to multiple screens and transfer people to different associates and to different stores.
So the right type of technology combined with keeping it simple and intuitive makes life easier for the customer, and also makes it easier for people inside the stores or inside the call centers to respond quickly and in a more appropriate, detailed, customized manner.
Absolutely.
We have another question from Twitter, And this is from Arsalan Khan, who's wondering, as the technologies change and as the environment around you, the customer environment, the competitive environment is changing, how do you plan? How do you go forward and consider this ongoing change in your business strategy?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad that it was asked because one of the things we really haven't touched on so far is the need for a strong what I call digital core, right? So you know in the 90s there were ERP projects, and then people moved on to CRM projects, and you know you name it. There's been multiple waves of kind of software solutions that have been the hot trend that customers and companies have gone after. But the reality of it is that you know very few people still to this day have that strong digital core. And what I mean by that is that whenever people think about digital and they think about innovation, they automatically jump to, well, okay, how are we going to how do we come up with the sexy new technology that's customer facing, and what can we implement from in terms of beacons or RFID or IoT, that is cool and sophisticated and elevates our customer experience. And all of those are great questions to ask. And again, things that everyone has to continue to do, because I think the biggest lesson learned for retailers in the last few years is if you don't innovate and advance yourself as a company, then you can become irrelevant, right? I mean, we've seen numerous stories here where you name it, Blockbuster Video felt that they had such a good customer base and such a good value proposition that they were invincible and didn't need to change, and they didn't really buy into this streaming online craze that hit, and that was unfortunately their downfall. So I think the digital core. So coming back to that what that really entails is, do you have a strong supply chain that can allow you to fulfill orders anytime, anywhere? That's really the bottom line, right? Our customers want their stuff. They don't care where it's being shipped from. They don't care how it's being shipped. As long as you can honor your commitment to get that particular merchandise to the customer on the day and date that it's promised, then you're meeting the customer expectations. So that's obviously very difficult. And when we talk about omni-channel, right, we talked about 360-degree view of the customer, but another extremely important piece that we touched on very briefly was the silos across channels coming down. And as those silos come down, this digital core becomes more and more important, because in the old days it was fine for you to have a website, and the website only having inventory to your e-com warehouse merchandise. But now you really need to make sure that you have it's almost another 360-degree view. It's a 360-degree view of product and inventory, and looking at that across all of your channels, and the ability to if come into a store, we don't have the right size, style, and color of your shirt, which even in our largest stores is very challenging, because again, I mentioned we have a very large assortment, 50,000 SKUs. So it's going to be physically impossible to keep in stock every single size, style, color variation for everyone. So there's obviously tools that allow you to to allocate product and to come up with these assortments, but there's always going to be times where someone comes in and we don't have that product, and how do we get you that product? We have 50 of those units in the warehouse that are available for e-com orders, but it's a shame if that inventory is not available to in the store, or vice versa. So that digital core is, so this is a very kind of a long-winded response to the question, but it's very important context. I think that needs to be provided, because if you don't have that supply chain that's dynamic and nimble, and you as a company are unable to really, react truly dynamically and real time to customer demand, then you've missed the mark. So, there's a back end piece here that's not sexy. No one, customer again doesn't care about what you run for a supply chain package. They don't care about what your digital core is. What they do care is that you have a good one. And if you don't have a good one, then you're not going to be able to meet those customer requirements. So I think the key message here is you need the strong digital core, and then you need to augment it with sophisticated and specialized technologies that are sexy and customer facing, such as beacons and RFID and IoT devices that really enhance the customer engagement process. And really those are all possible only on top of that foundation.
That's really interesting. So this view then of both the customers and your supply chain means that as you are developing that digital core, it transforms both your front end processes, that the customer facing processes, as well as deep into the back end processes.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a great point. We've invested a lot, and I think the other thing I'll point out here, right, is that all of these are not just technology projects, right? Before we did an ounce of technology work, we've done significant process reengineering work to come up with things like a global view of inventory in a global trading company, where we can really, leverage our inventory and flex it across markets in a way that allows us to maximize the needs of the customer and meet those demands. And just one example that I'll give there is that we're a global company, but obviously the huge part of our business is North America. So as a result, we have two kinds of product. We have the basics product that's available year round, and that would be your white shirts, blue shirts, gabardine pants, ties, etc. And then we have the seasonal product, and there's 4 seasons of that product that's released, obviously based on, and it follows the season in North America. So it's Northern Hemisphere seasons. Now, what that means, obviously, is that when our Australia market comes to look at the fall collection, it's not going to be fall in Australia for 6 more months, but they still need to make an educated guess in terms of how a certain product is going to do in their market, and place a buy or place an order of that merchandise so that they can have it. So in the old days, what would happen is that every market kind of put those requests in, and they got those requests, but a lot can change in 6 months. We may find that Australia under ordered, but Singapore over ordered. And in the old days, there was no way for us to dynamically reallocate that inventory so that we could still, maximize the inventory on hand and still, keep the sale and not lose those sales. So now we truly have that ability where we have a global view of inventory. We have a team called GIM, Global Inventory Management Team, and they are really the gatekeepers of inventory, and they have the ability to do this and to flex product across markets. And when the fall collection is done for North America, then we have the ability to hold that merchandise and fulfill demand in Australia 4 or 5 months from now, if that is where we need it. So that piece of it, I think, is extremely important, and I think it goes back to your, to the original point that you made. And I think the other point that this is highlighting is that there is a big. This is not all about the technology, right? I mean, the technology is obviously a very critical enabler, but again, we've done many projects that are purely business process focused and organizational focused before we've launched some of these technology projects, because the worst thing that we could do is just take a 100-year-old process and put it into a new technology tool, which is really not elevating our brand at all.
So this is, first off, I want to remind everybody that we're talking with Sahal Laher, who is the Executive Vice President and CIO of Brooks Brothers. And when he's talking about breaking down silos and changing all of these things, remember, keep in mind, Brooks Brothers was founded almost 200 years ago. And so it's just amazing to me to hear about a 200-year-old company and the way that you are adapting and remaining nimble. But we have a very interesting comment from Kirk Bourne, who is the principal data scientist at Booz Allen on Twitter. And Kirk Bourne makes this comment. He says, quote, cross-channel is a type of customer analytics, not a type of customer.
That's a great point. And I think, again, it comes back to just the role that analytics plays in today's world. And again, it's really, to me, it's cross industry, right? It's not just something for retailers or fashion companies. And so I think, that's spot on, where, it's really mining that information. And, let's not limit ourselves to internal information only, right? It shouldn't just be about the systems that we have internally, or the order management system, or the e-com system. Nowadays there's a ton of information that's available, that is on external data sources. You have social media. We have, for a nickel, you can buy, 200 attributes of data on almost anyone in the US in terms of their buying patterns and purchase behaviors and so on. And that's already, finding widespread use in other industries as well. And, insurance companies are using that to do things like lifestyle-based analytics and underwriting. So that's that. I think that remark is spot on, because you really have to change your mindset as a company to see data as a very critical cross-channel enabler and differentiator. And instead of just traditionally, people have just kind of hoarded data. And like I said earlier, it's I'm not being critical. I mean, everyone did it. We did it as well, because no one is staffed to have hundreds of people in the analytics department that can go do this. And so it's only now that these tools are becoming available, and we have the ability to be able to run hypothetical scenarios on terabytes and terabytes of data within minutes, based on advances in things like in-memory databases and so on. And that in the old days was just not possible. So I think it's a very interesting time that we live in right now, and we have great tools available to us. There's a year from now, if we have this conversation, there'll be additional tools that we can't even envision today that will have come out to even elevate this further. But I think that really is highlighting the need for companies to continue to innovate. And any of these initiatives around customer service or customer experience or omni-channel commerce and digital commerce, they cannot be a one and done initiative where you say, okay, our mobile app is live, we're done. It's just, the world is never going to be like that anymore. You're going to need to continue to have your continuous improvement mindset as an organization. You're going to need to innovate and have be testing new technologies in-house in an innovation lab or something like that, and seeing which ones work for you, and then adapting those to your brand and rolling those out across your markets.
Sahal Laher, CIO of Brooks Brothers, we have literally about 1 minute left. And maybe can you share with us or give your advice to other companies who are undertaking various types of programs of change, which clearly Brooks Brothers is in a constant state of reinvention and innovation. So what's your advice? How to get that done and make it happen inside an established organization?
Absolutely. So I think one of the guiding principles that we as a company have adopted is the crawl, walk, run approach, which is very important because some of these initiatives otherwise can be overwhelming, right? When you try and look at the big picture of everything that needs to be done and you try and take it all on together and boil the ocean, that's not a strategy for success. And you're going to end up with a lot of, a lot of projects that are kind of disjointed, and you ultimately will not be able to meet the promise to your customers. So I would really encourage everyone to take that approach and to really prioritize, and look at very objectively where you are as a brand in relation to the market, in relation to the competition, and figure out which of the capabilities you're lagging on that you want to invest more in, which are the ones that are on parity with the rest of the market that you may want to leapfrog, and which of the ones are you leading on that you want to continue to be a leader in. And ultimately that roadmap is really going to drive your success. And I think the other piece that I would mention again is, we've touched on it a couple times during this call, but be very careful to not get into the trap of making it all about the technology. So again, the technology, it can be a very strategic enabler. It can absolutely drive some of these initiatives from an execution standpoint, but don't shortchange the process component, the process reengineering component, and the change management component of what that's going to mean to your associates and to your customer.
Wow, you have given us a real education and a fascinating look inside one of the most well-known iconic brands in the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have been talking on episode number 200 of CXOTalk with Sahal Laher, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Brooks Brothers. What an amazing conversation. I can't wait to go back and listen to it again and just hear this wealth of knowledge about how a large and very old company has remained relevant and remained current in a changing and highly competitive environment. I'd like to thank everybody for watching CXOTalk, and I really want to give a shout out to Livestream, who provides our video infrastructure and distribution, because Livestream, it just works, which is the best possible thing I can say. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we have 2 shows next week, so go to cxotalk.com/episodes, and please join us again. Bye-bye.